I was 13 when I learned that some women will burn your mother's memory just to warm their own hands. My stepmother Valerie burned my mother's journals first. Then she threw my mother's life's work, the rarest orchid on earth, into a winter garbage can, where it froze to death before I could save it. What Valerie didn't know was that my mother was a woman who always planted backups. Roots that sleep for decades. Songs that wake them. And daughters who remember the frequency. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're new here, my name is Linnea, and this is the story of how I grew a forest from the roots my stepmother missed, and how I learned that the rarest flowers don't bloom for people who buy them, they bloom for women who sing to them in the dark. If this channel has ever made you feel less alone, hit subscribe. We tell stories like this every week. And if you're watching because someone tried to erase the person who made you, stay until the end. I need you to hear how this ends. Here's my story. My mother May was not a warm woman. I say this with love because warmth was not her language. She was precision, the kind of precision that measures humidity to the decimal, that notes the exact angle of light that makes an orchid decide to bloom or sleep another year. She discovered Phalaenopsis mei-linnae when I was 4, on an expedition to a remote cave system in northern Vietnam. She named it after us May for her, Linnae for me, though she always said it was the other way around. "You are the reason I came back from that cave," she told me. Not the orchid. You, the orchid, was her second daughter. I understood this early, the way children understand competition without being told. It lived in our greenhouse, in a controlled environment that cost more per month than some apartments. It bloomed once every 7 years. Pale green petals like jade held to candlelight, lasting only 3 days before collapsing into the soil that had made it. My mother photographed each bloom obsessively, measured its pheromones, recorded the specific frequency of its scent, a sweetness so faint most humans couldn't detect it, but which attracted a single species of moth that pollinated nothing else. She taught me everything. Not because she expected me to become a botanist, but because she believed knowledge was the only inheritance that couldn't be stolen. "Seeds can die," she said, showing me how to extract them from the seed pod without damaging the embryo. "Cuttings can rot. But what you know," she touched my forehead, her fingers smelling of peat and something sweeter, "what you know lives in the body, and bodies are harder to burn." She was wrong about that last part, but she was right about the rest. She died when I was 12. Cancer, fast and indifferent, the kind that doesn't care about rare orchids or daughters who still need their mothers. I sat by her bed in the final weeks, reading her journals aloud while she drifted in and out of morphine dreams. She would wake sometimes, grip my hand, and whisper botanical facts I already knew but pretended to learn for the first time. "The mei-linnae doesn't grow from seed in captivity," she told me, her voice thready. "It needs the fungus. Rhizoctonia May. I never published that, too dangerous. Some people would destroy the cave to replicate it. Where does the fungus live? I asked, though I knew. In the roots, she said, always in the roots. And the roots go deeper than anyone digs. She died on a Tuesday. The orchid was dormant, 3 years from its next bloom, its green leaves deceptively ordinary. I touched it after the funeral, my fingers leaving prints on the glass of its enclosure. It was the last time I would touch it for 20 years. My father David married Valerie 6 months later. I don't blame him for the timing, grief makes people desperate, and Valerie was very good at appearing solid, reliable, the opposite of my mother's beautiful chaos. She was an interior designer, which in her hands meant the elimination of interior. White walls. Minimal furniture. Nothing cluttered, nothing sentimental, nothing that suggested a life had been lived in the space before her arrival. The first thing she burned was my mother's journals. I came home from school to the smell of smoke, ran to the backyard, and found her feeding pages into a metal barrel. She looked up, unsurprised, and said, "Your father and I discussed it. No ghosts in our new life." I tried to save them. I reached into the barrel, burned my hand, pulled out a single page, half a page really, covered in my mother's handwriting about soil pH levels. Valerie watched me without moving. "You're being dramatic, Linnea. They were just notebooks. She was just a person. Time to move forward." The second thing she destroyed was the orchid. Not directly, Valerie was too smart for obvious cruelty. She waited until January, the coldest week of the year, and announced that the greenhouse was being converted into a meditation space. The orchid, she said, was taking up valuable real estate. She had David move it outside to the garbage cans where it sat for 3 days before the trash collection came. I found it on the second day. Frozen, the leaves blackened, the root system exposed to air that was killing it cell by cell. I tried to warm it, to replant it, to sing to it the songs my mother had sung. But the damage was too great, too fast, too intentional. Valerie had known exactly what she was doing. January. Below freezing. A tropical orchid with a root system that couldn't survive exposure for more than hours. I held the dead plant and I didn't cry. I had learned, at 13, that crying in front of Valerie was another form of defeat. She would comfort me performatively and use my tears as evidence of my instability, my obsession, my inability to move forward. But that night, in my mother's study, now Valerie's home office, painted white, stripped of everything but a single photograph of May in the hallway, I remembered something. My mother's voice, years ago, touching my nose, smiling. Mothers always have a plan B, little one. I went to the garden. 3 places she had shown me casually as if they were nothing. Beneath the old oak, where we had buried my first goldfish. Behind the compost bin, where she had accidentally dropped a root cutting years ago. And in the corner of the herb garden, where she grew Vietnamese coriander and told stories about her own mother who had sung to plants because she believed they had souls. I dug with my hands, frozen, numb. The first 2 sites were empty, or rather, they contained dead matter, roots that had been killed by Valerie's lawn chemicals, her perfect grass, her elimination of anything wild. The third site held a nodule. White, dormant, the size of my thumbnail. A rhizome, a backup. A piece of my mother's plan B, sleeping in the frozen earth, waiting. I didn't know if it was alive. I didn't know if it was mei-linnae or just some common orchid my mother had planted as camouflage. But I wrapped it in my scarf, hid it in my closet, and waited. I waited 20 years, not passively. I became a botanist, specializing in endangered orchids, the kind of specialist that museums hire for consultations and expeditions hire for cave surveys. I worked in Singapore, in Kew Gardens, in the Amazon, in Madagascar. I learned to identify orchids by scent, by root structure, by the particular way their leaves held light. I published papers, built a reputation, became someone who was asked to speak at conferences about conservation and extinction and the ethics of botanical collection. And everywhere I went, I looked for the mei-linnae. Not the plant itself. I knew it was extinct in the wild, or nearly so, protected only in the memory of women like my mother and the failed attempts of laboratories to replicate its symbiosis. I looked for the knowledge. The women who knew things that weren't in journals. The grandmothers who sang to plants. The farmers who understood that some roots sleep for decades, waiting for the right frequency, the right song, the right combination of moisture and vibration and prayer. Valerie, meanwhile, transformed my mother's house into a monument to absence. The greenhouse became a white room with a single meditation cushion, which Valerie photographed for her Instagram minimalist wellness space in historic home. The gardens became perfect lawn, chemical green, sterile. My mother's photograph in the hallway shrank, year by year, until it was replaced by a generic landscape. "Your father and I felt it was time," Valerie said when I noticed. "She's been gone so long. Dwelling isn't healthy." I didn't dwell. I worked. I built a life that was small and precise, like my mother's measurements. An apartment with good light. A greenhouse on the roof that I rented from a community garden collective. A network of women botanists, mostly from Southeast Asia, who understood that the Western Academy had named only a fraction of what existed, and that the real knowledge lived in bodies, in songs, in the particular relationship between a woman and the soil she tended. I didn't go home often. David had become a ghost in his own house, following Valerie's aesthetic directives, her travel plans, her social calendar. He smiled when he saw me, hugged me, asked about my work with the vague interest of someone who had decided long ago that his daughter's passions were eccentric but harmless. He never defended my mother's memory. He never mentioned the journals. He never asked about the orchid. When I was 33, Valerie called. "We're selling the house," she said, her voice bright with the particular satisfaction of someone who has won. "Too big for us now. Your father and I want to travel, see the world, live a little finally." I felt something cold in my chest. Not grief, I had grieved the house years ago, grieved it each time I visited and found another room painted white, another memory erased. But something else. A door closing. The last physical connection to my mother, to the greenhouse where she had sung, to the garden where I had found the rhizome. "I want the greenhouse," I said, "not the house, just that space." Valerie laughed. It was the same laugh she had used when I burned my hand in her journal fire, when I found the frozen orchid, when I asked about my mother's photograph. "Whatever for, to fill it with dirt again. Your mother was obsessed, Linnea. It's time you moved past that." Grown women don't play with flowers. I'll buy it, I said, separately. Whatever the market rate is for a converted meditation space. There was a pause. I could hear her calculating the money, the inconvenience, the potential drama of refusing. I'll discuss it with your father, she said finally. But I make no promises. That space has energy, your mother's energy. It needs cleansing before anyone else could use it. She said cleansing the way other people said exorcism. I understood then that she had always been afraid, not of my mother was dead, powerless ash, but of what my mother represented, of knowledge that couldn't be controlled, of roots that went deeper than her chemicals could reach. That night I drove to the house. I didn't knock. I used the key I had kept since I was 13, hidden in the lining of an old purse. I went to the garden to the third site and I dug. The rhizome was still there. Smaller, perhaps, dormant, certainly, but alive. I could feel it, the particular resilience of root tissue that has learned to wait. I wrapped it in damp moss, placed it in a container, and drove back to the city. I didn't ask Valerie for the greenhouse again. I didn't need it. I took the rhizome to the community garden where I rented greenhouse space. It was a small collective, mostly Vietnamese immigrants and refugees, women who grew herbs and vegetables that reminded them of home. They knew me, the orchid lady, the one who asked too many questions about their growing techniques, who listened too intently to their grandmother's stories. I showed the rhizome to Mrs. Nguyen, an 80-year-old woman who grew raw ram in a hydroponic system she had built from discarded PVC pipes. She looked at it, touched it, smelled it. Then she looked at me with eyes that had seen more than I could imagine. "Your mother's?" she asked. "How did you know?" "Because you look at it the way my mother looked at the cutting she brought from Saigon. The way women look at things that are not supposed to survive but do." She handed it back. "This needs singing, not science. Science keeps it alive. Singing wakes it up." I knew what she meant. My mother's journals, the ones I had saved, the ones Valerie didn't know about, photocopied page by page in my school library when I was 11, contained more than botanical data. They contained songs. Vietnamese folk songs my mother's mother had taught her, which Mei had sung to the orchid during its dormant periods. She had noted frequencies, decibel levels, the particular resonance of certain notes. The rhizoctonia responds to vibration, she had written. The mycorrhizal network communicates through frequency. Singing is not metaphor, it is mechanism. I sang. Badly at first. My Vietnamese was broken, my accent worse, the melodies half-remembered from childhood. I sang in the greenhouse at night, when the other renters had gone home, when the city lights filtered through the glass and made everything feel like underwater. I sang the songs my mother had sung, and I sang my own songs, improvisations that felt right even when they weren't traditional. For 6 months, nothing happened. The rhizome sat in its pot, dormant, indifferent. I began to doubt, not the science, but myself. Maybe I was the wrong singer. Maybe the frequency had to be exact, passed down through generations of Vietnamese women, not improvised by a half-Vietnamese daughter who had lost her language along with her mother. Then, on a Tuesday in March, I noticed a swelling. A small, pale nodule on the rhizome's surface. I didn't touch it. I didn't photograph it. I just sang louder, more desperately, more hopefully. It grew, slowly over weeks, then months. A shoot, then a leaf, then the particular architecture of a Phalaenopsis. The fleshy roots, the leathery leaves, the promise of something that might eventually bloom. But the story is not just about the flower. It never was. While the rhizome grew, I built something else. The community garden became a center, first informally, then officially, for the preservation of endangered orchids and the knowledge of women who grew them. I used my academic connections to secure small grants. I used my network of women botanists to identify species that the Western Academy had ignored, dismissed, or failed to propagate. I learned that my mother's mei-linnae was not unique. There were hundreds of orchids, thousands of plants, known only to women in remote villages, passed down through generations of oral knowledge, never published, never patented, never named by men in European institutions. I traveled. I met women in Vietnam, in Laos, in Cambodia, who showed me plants that had no Latin names, only names in languages I couldn't speak. They showed me techniques, grafting methods, fermentation processes, songs that had never appeared in any journal. They were suspicious at first, these women. They had been exploited before by botanists who took their knowledge and published it as their own, by pharmaceutical companies who turned their plants into pills they couldn't afford. But I was different. I was mei-linnae's daughter. I was the woman who sang to a rhizome for 6 months. And slowly, they trusted me. They gave me cuttings, seeds, stories. They gave me their names, which I recorded carefully, which I never published without permission. They became my network, my family, my inheritance in a form that Valerie could never have imagined. Valerie heard about it eventually. The community garden made local news. Urban Orchid Sanctuary preserves ancient knowledge. She saw my name, my photograph, the greenhouse she had tried to turn into a meditation space. She called me, her voice sharp with the particular anger of someone who has lost control of a narrative. "You're embarrassing your father," she said. "This hobby of yours, these people you're associating with, it's not appropriate for someone with your background." My background, I repeated, your education, your opportunities. You could be working in proper institutions, not playing in dirt with immigrants. I thought about the women I had met. The grandmother in Vietnam who had shown me how to extract a particular enzyme from orchid bark using nothing but rainwater and patience. The refugee in Queens who had taught me a grafting technique that had saved 3 species from extinction. The daughter of a Cambodian farmer who was now getting her PhD, funded by our collective, studying the very plants her grandmother had grown. They are my proper institution. I said they are my education. And you wouldn't understand that, Valerie, because you have never grown anything. You have only eliminated. I hung up. She didn't call again. 7 years after I found the rhizome, the Phalaenopsis mei-linnae bloomed. Not one flower. 12. Pale green, translucent like jade held to candlelight, exactly as my mother had described. The scent filled the greenhouse, faint, almost undetectable but present. The specific frequency that attracted the moth, the particular signature that made it unique. I had organized a festival around it, not a scientific conference, a gathering. Women from my network, from Vietnam, from Laos, from Cambodia, from the Vietnamese diaspora in America. Each brought a plant that only she knew how to grow. Each brought a story, a song, a technique that had been passed down through generations. The greenhouse was full of orchids I had never seen, names I had never learned, knowledge that existed outside of every system that had tried to contain it. Mrs. Nguyen opened the festival. She stood before the blooming mei-linnae, now a mature plant with multiple stems, and she sang. Not the folk songs my mother had sung, but something older, something from her own grandmother, something that predated nations and borders and the particular violence of the 20th century. Other women joined in, their voices layering, harmonizing, creating frequencies that I could feel in my chest rather than hear with my ears. The mei-linnae seemed to respond. Its petals opened wider, its scent intensified, its leaves trembled slightly in the still air. I don't know if it was actually responding, or if I was imagining it, or if the distinction even mattered. What mattered was the singing, the gathering, the particular magic of women who had survived erasure and were now, finally, visible. Valerie came. I didn't invite her. She must have heard about the festival through my father's social connections, or perhaps she simply followed the news coverage. She stood at the entrance to the greenhouse, dressed in white, looking exactly as she had when she burned my mother's journals. She tried to enter. Mrs. Nguyen stopped her, not with violence, not with words even. She simply stood in the doorway, small and ancient and immovable, and shook her head. After a moment, she said, in her accented English, "Only for those who bring seeds, not for those who burn roots." Valerie stared at her. Then she looked at me across the greenhouse, across the distance of 20 years and a frozen orchid and 1,000 songs. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at her and I knew that she saw, finally, what she had missed. Not the orchid, not the festival, but the network, the community, the particular architecture of survival that she had tried to demolish and which had instead expanded beyond her comprehension. She turned and left. There was no confrontation, no dramatic exit, just exclusion. The first time in her life, I think, that a door had closed to her. But the real climax came later. After the festival, after the flowers had faded, after the women had returned to their homes and their gardens and their continuing work of preservation, I was organizing my mother's papers, the photocopied journals, the notes I had taken over decades, the correspondence with women across the world, and I found something I had missed. A folder hidden inside another folder, labeled only with a date, my 10th birthday. Inside were not botanical notes. They were coordinates. Latitude and longitude, written in my mother's precise handwriting, accompanied by sketches of cave systems, of root structures, of something she had called the mother colony. And a note in Vietnamese which I struggled to translate. The mei-linnae I brought home was not the original. It was a cutting from the mother colony which I left in place to protect it. The coordinates lead to the true source. The original plant is there, with the original Rhizoctonia, in a microclimate that cannot be replicated. I have encoded the location in the plant's genetic markers, a map hidden in its DNA. If anyone tries to exploit the cave, the colony will die. It will only survive for those who understand that it is not a resource. It is a relationship. I read it 3 times. Then I understood. My mother had not just hidden rhizomes in our garden. She had hidden a map in the orchid itself. The mei-linnae that Valerie had thrown away, the original plant, the one from Vietnam, had contained genetic information that led back to the mother colony. And Valerie, in her ignorance, had destroyed not just a plant but a key, a map, a legacy that could have been exploited by anyone with the technology to read it. But the rhizome I had saved, the backup, the plan B, contained the same information. It was the same plant, genetically identical, carrying the same coded coordinates in its DNA. My mother had created a redundancy so perfect that even the destruction of the original couldn't erase the map. I had the coordinates, I had the network, and I had the understanding, hard one, sung into existence over 7 years, that this knowledge was not mine to exploit, it was mine to protect. I didn't publish the coordinates. I didn't patent the discovery. I went to Vietnam, to the region indicated, with 2 women from my network, a botanist from Hanoi and a village elder who knew the cave system from her grandmother's stories. We found the mother colony, deep in a cave that had no name on any map, growing in a microclimate of perfect humidity and filtered light. It was larger than I had imagined. Hundreds of plants, some decades old, their roots interwoven in a network that spread across the cave floor like a neural system. The Rhizoctonia was visible, a faint luminescence in the root tissue, the fungal partner that made the symbiosis possible, and the smell, the particular frequency of sweetness that my mother had described, detectable only in the cave's still air. We didn't take cuttings. We didn't collect samples. We established a sanctuary, funded by our collective, protected by the local women who had always known about the cave but had kept it secret from outsiders. The Phalaenopsis mei-linnae would grow there, wild, unpatented, unnamed by any institution. It would bloom every 7 years, and women would sing to it, and the moth would come, and the cycle would continue as it had for centuries before my mother found it, and as it would for centuries after I was gone. I named the sanctuary after my mother. Not mei-linnae, that was the plant, the legacy, the thing that existed beyond names. I named it simply, May's Garden, a place where knowledge was not extracted but exchanged, where roots were not commodities but connections, where women could come, could learn, could sing, could remember that the earth holds secrets that no amount of burning can destroy. I am Linnea. I am 33 years old. I spent 20 years singing to a root that most people would have thrown away, and I learned that the rarest things in the world are not rare because they are scarce. They are rare because they require patience and frequency and the particular understanding that some knowledge cannot be bought or sold or burned. It can only be sung into existence, generation after generation, by women who remember. My stepmother Valerie still lives in her white house, though she sold my mother's home years ago. She travels, I think. She posts photographs of minimalist spaces, of clean lines, of absence. She doesn't know about the sanctuary. She doesn't know about the mother colony. She doesn't know that the orchid she tried to destroy is now a forest, protected by women she would dismiss as uneducated, growing in a cave she couldn't find on any map. If someone has tried to burn your mother's memory, to throw her legacy in the garbage, to tell you that roots are just dirt and songs are just superstition, I need you to know they are wrong. The roots go deeper than they dig. The songs travel farther than their hearing. And the daughters who remember are not obsessed, they are just waiting for the right frequency, for the right moment, for the bloom that proves, finally, that erasure is temporary and survival is permanent. See you in the next story.